Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Season 2 in the People in Fundraising Conversations webcast, where I invite guests from the nonprofit industry to share with our audience a bit about their career journey, as well as things they've learned as a person working in advancement and social impact. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Jason Roesler to our program. Hello, Jason.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Couple of reasons why I have Jason as my guest today. One, he is the first guest to represent Washington State, and I try to get all 50 states and beyond in this program. So, is it the Evergreen State?
It is the Evergreen State.
There we go, the Evergreen State. Joining us from Eastern Washington. And Jason is currently the Senior Director of Prospect Development at Washington State University. He's also a 3-time alum of Washington State University, and he currently serves on the APRA International Board of Directors. So that's quite in itself a big role, and we'll get into that later in our conversation. And Jason and I connected a couple of years ago when he was on the APRA board and I was serving on APRA's online content committee. Jason, you were our liaison to the board, so it was good to be connected that way. Well, Jason, I'd love for you to start off, as we customarily do with guests, by having you just share how you entered the nonprofit industry, please.
Sure. So my path to prospect development, like many others, I'm assuming, was more happenstance than strategic. I had recently completed a master's degree in political science at Washington State University, and my wife was working on her master's, so I found a job. And I took a job working as a 911 dispatcher in the Seattle area, and I absolutely hated it. It was just a terrible fit for me. I didn't have the right personality for the job. I didn't really like talking to people on the phone. I didn't like the high stress environment. So it was just not a great fit. So my wife had just completed her master's program, and I had an opportunity to come back to WSU with funding and a doctoral program in higher education administration. So I was lucky enough. I had been very involved with a number of student activities during my undergraduate career, and I had a pretty good network kind of built out in student affairs there. So the second that my wife graduates in the Seattle area, we moved back to Pullman, and I started working towards my doctorate. And I was working in our Greek life office at the time. So here I am. I'm in my late 20s. I'm working in our Greek life office, and I'm going to school full time. And those of you who have worked in student affairs, that's just working crazy hours, including like nights and weekends. And basically, when you take it into account, you're like making minimum wage and working like 70 hours a week, like, just doing crazy stuff. So at the time, there was a job opening looking for a prospect research analyst at the foundation. And at that time, I had no idea what a prospect research analyst did, nor kind of what even the foundation did. So this was in, I think, 2007. So they're looking for a job with people that have database experience, which I had, working from all of the databases, doing 911 and kind of looking at, all of the criminal databases. And then they were looking for people who had some quantitative analysis skills, which I had from my training in grad school, though I never ended up using that. So I ended up taking this job, and that was kind of, 2007 was still at a time when prospect research was very much in its infancy in terms of kind of the tools and methods and really even the significance of the fundraising operations. We were, kind of glorified database managers at that point.
Right.
So I ended up taking the job because it was paying better than what I was doing, and it had a much more kind of 8 to 5 schedule. And my plan was, I'm going to complete my doctorate using the kind of tuition remission program that we had for staff at WSU, and think, this is going to be kind of a short-term opportunity. I'm going to complete my doctorate and go into the faculty or go do something else.
Yeah.
So I show up as a research analyst and I kind of put in my 2 years, and then I get promoted to the senior research analyst. And I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like
Yeah.
this. And then about 3 years later after that, I'm still there and I'm kind of plugging along, and my boss retires, and then I end up getting the director of prospect research job. And I'm like, okay, well, this looks like this could be a potential career path, not just, something I was doing short term. And then I was the director there for about 6 years, and then I get the senior director job. And kind of due to a reorg at that time, I ended up with our biorecords team and some of our other kind of advancement services things as well. And I kind of, ended up learning some more of the advancement services outside of kind of prospect development, and kind of leads me up to today here. It was, bad job that I didn't want to do. And then I kind of just fell into this like many others, I think, in the field. I don't know if I've talked to too many people that were like, yeah, I'm going to be a prospect researcher when I grow up. So
Right.
it was just kind of one of those things. You find something that you're like, oh yeah, I kind of like this, and this really kind of fits me. So here I am.
Excellent. So just over 15 years now.
Yeah, I've been at WSU about 19, and in October, I think I will have my 16th in prospect development.
Awesome. All right. Sweet 16. I liked how you phrased it at the beginning, that it was more happenstance than planned. I think a lot of people, when they talk about whether it's prospect development or frontline fundraising, they talk about, oh, I fell into it. And that is a term you used later on, but I just picked up on how you first said it was more happenstance. This, in my mind, like, just there's a different vibe to saying happenstance. So I like that.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but from my personal experience, I think you find jobs that you can't do. You're like the 911 thing.
Yeah.
I was terrible at that. That was just not a good fit for me. But then when you find something that does fit, you can kind of really transition into that and be successful there, and be happy there. So
yeah,
I just think more of those are happenstance than, oh yeah, I got my degree and I'm going to do this, this, and this.
Right.
I never really knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. So
yeah.
Here we are.
Well, thank you for sharing that part of your career with us, Jason. I want to pick up on, you mentioned that you found out that you have the skill and the personality for prospect development. As you have prepared for our conversation today, was there a specific moment or an experience in these last 16 years where you felt that this field really suits you well? Was it a curiosity? Was it just the ability to learn new skills? Anything like that?
So honestly, I felt right at home in prospect development almost immediately. I consider myself an introvert, and I was really into kind of the data analysis piece. So I was hired during the ramp up of our second comprehensive campaign. And at that time, we were quite a bit of a smaller shop than we are now. We had a director, and then there was 3 analysts. And kind of really the first 2 years of my job, I pretty much exclusively did prospect identification.
Oh, okay.
And working there, I found the work kind of really interesting. To me, it was like you're solving a puzzle. You get to do research on really interesting people. The work isn't the same every day. And there's a lot of different ways that you can go about doing prospect identification or prospect development to kind of get to the same conclusion. So it was like, okay, I'm going to run it down this rabbit hole, and then sometimes you have to jump over here. And I felt that was really good for me as, like you said, I think there's a lot of intellectual curiosity in our field, and people are interested in kind of just learning about other people and other ways to do things.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I really believe in the mission of kind of WSU and the whole land grant university mission of really providing access and opportunity for students. And I really enjoyed that the timeline on some of these was short enough that you can actually see the impact of your work. You could like identify somebody, get them into a portfolio, have some of our development officers go out and meet with them and kind of get them into the pipeline. And in that period of time, you can actually see outcomes like, oh yeah, we've identified this person, they've gone through the cycle, they've actually made gifts. And I mean, being here for 16 years, which I'm feeling like an old timer here, but we have some people on our board of directors now that I identified during the last campaign, and they've, they're kind of at our highest level and they've made 7-figure gifts. And it's been really nice for me to see that what we do matters, and that can really help reinforce and help you feel invigorated kind of in this field, really moving forward, that it's not like, okay, I'm just, putting widgets into the box here and then you never see the outcomes of it kind of going down that path. So that was kind of a couple of the things that I think have really resonated with me, as that this was really a good fit for me in the field. And that's kind of where I really felt like, yeah, I could make a career out of this.
Yeah. Well, that's dynamite. Thank you for sharing that. And about the board people you've identified, the directors or trustees, I would imagine that's rewarding to say, hey, I found that person way back when, and now we've done the appropriate engagement and stewarding, and here they are on the board of trustees.
Yep. I know those types of things really show the impact of what we do, and like really make me feel like what we do matter here, instead of, like I said, it being so removed from your day-to-day work that you never see the outcomes. It's been really nice to see parts of that.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, my next question, Jason, is a little bit of a pivot. Before we started recording, you mentioned that WSU is going through a new database conversion. And for anyone in the nonprofit field that works with a database, they know kind of the ups and downs and the timelines and budget fluctuations involved in that process. So I think there's a tie-in, maybe specifically to that, but with that example to this question. But I wanted to pose it to you here. There's an op-ed columnist for the New York Times named Ross Douthat. And just about a year ago, in one of his pieces, he wrote that failure casts a longer and more enduring shadow sometimes than success. So as you prepared for our conversation today, Jason, I just wondered, are there any learning moments that come to mind when you read that statement? It doesn't necessarily have to be a failure, but instead an opportunity at any point in your career for improvement.
So when you pose this question to me, Tim, I think that statement does really resonate with me. I think a lot of people in our field are kind of really intrinsically motivated, and many of us tend to maybe internalize things a little bit more and maybe dwell on failures. And I know personally, I have often learned more and take more stock in the failures than the successes that I really do. Because, you're like, yeah, that worked great, move on. But I know I can be a little bit hard on myself.
Sure.
So I've had numerous of these opportunities to really learn. But like many others in the field, I had the opportunity to work with Jon Thorsen, who was my senior AVP of operations here at WSU. And one of the things that I was lucky enough to learn from Jon is he has his rules. Well, one of his rules was make new mistakes. And by this, he really taught us to learn from our previous mistakes, but continue to take kind of informed chances. And I've really
Oh,
taken that philosophy with me and say, impacted that into my personal work as well as my management style. And
mm,
this field is just full of intellectually curious individuals who really enjoy data processes and kind of system approaches.
mm-hmm.
So I really like to take that into what we're working on and really take those kind of chances. So
Yeah.
specifically during my career, I really highlighted one that really I think I could have worked on the personnel side, and then one kind of around the data. Um, on the personnel side, one of the most significant areas that I really feel like I learned a lot from was my transition from being an analyst to a young director.
Oh.
Um, I find it fascinating in our field and many others that you often get promoted to management due to your technical skills. Those things are often completely two different skill sets. And even if you're really technical at that, you may not know what you're doing as a manager. So
It's a good point.
I really feel like I faced this as I moved from being like some of my team's now peer to being their manager. And it took me at least a year to figure out what I was doing and like how to
Yeah,
even address issues amongst the team. So
sure.
I really feel like I didn't really know how to manage or lead, and I would often just kind of ignore issues and hope they would go away kind of in that first year because no one had trained me to like do this.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it really took me a while to that doing this and just kind of ignoring issues ultimately makes things worse as they kind of just continue to sit there and fester under the surface that you
Oh,
just really
yeah.
need to do it.
Yeah.
So that really taught me a lot on how to manage people. It showed me that kind of learning what motivates people isn't the same for everybody. And like, you should probably communicate with people and not just be like, oh, there's an issue, I'm not going to talk about this. So,
Uh-huh.
so from there, now I really try to over communicate and do a lot more kind of informal check-ins with people,
Okay.
just whether it's on teams or just kind of one-on-one, and make sure people are doing all right and kind of understand what's going on. And and that situation really taught me that the vast majority of disagreements are merely kind of a breakdown in communication. And
Yeah.
I really do believe that most people are not trying to be a jerk
Right.
at work. It's just most conflict is either a misunderstanding or kind of a breakdown in communication.
Yeah.
And kind of that first year really taught me the importance of getting all the parties involved in a room and kind of laying out what the expectations are and the constraints are in a lot of different situations. And if you can kind of explicitly communicate and get those agreed upon, things will go a lot smoother.
Yeah.
So that was really one on the personnel side.
I
On
like
the
that a
data
lot.
on the data side, I've also had a lot of just a number of situations where, things haven't gone well. But one in that I can really think of that stands out to me is I built out an entire kind of business process for a new principal giving team.
Mm.
We implemented it, and then like a month down the road, I figured out that the deal breaker was our reporting suite couldn't pull the data how I was storing it in the system.
Oh, okay.
So it doesn't necessarily feel great when you spend months like trying to figure out time and effort to, build the policies, figure out the policies, implement them, and
Yeah.
then you kind of launch stuff and then they're like, yeah, that didn't really work. And you have to go back to the drawing board almost immediately. That is one, a waste of time. And really, it's a hit to your ego too when you're
Oh,
like,
yes, it
I
is.
just spent like 3 months building this out. And that we're going to have to pivot immediately because
Oh.
our reporting structure didn't really pull from the fields that you were doing that. So I think that has really taught me that I really need to utilize both my team and kind of those outside of the prospect development team when we're utilizing and looking at business processes.
Yeah.
And just kind of that greater collaboration has really allowed me to consider things a bit more at an organizational level and not only kind of look at it from the prospect development level, but if I implement this, is that going to mess up the gift accountants or the biorecord team or how we're doing stewardship or all of those things, and really try to take those into account, because you don't really want to, kind of mess up somebody else's universe by your actions when you aren't thinking about that.
Yeah.
So I really tried to take that into account. And I think as I've moved further up the org chart too, I get more and more removed from the day-to-day processing work. And it becomes even more essential. Like right now, I have to reach out to our prospect management director and her team, because I don't even know how they do all the coding these days, in all honesty. Like that was never really a passion point of mine. I hired her because I was much more interested on the prospect research side, and the prospect management was never really an area that I loved or leaned into. So and then I go and talk to her and she's like, yeah, we don't do that anymore. And I was like, when did we change that? And she's like, 3 years ago. And I was like, oh, completely out of the loop on some of those things. So if you don't really take those into account, you may just be completely missing the boat on some things.
Well, those are good stories. Thank you. I wondered, Jason, as you reflected on those, did you also get a sense of, yes, I've identified the problem and we've worked to make things better, whether it's communication or being more integrated into processes. Did you, in hindsight, feel that brought more cohesion and trust among whoever you are partnering with as well?
I think it does, if you can kind of bring everybody into a room and really set the expectations that you're looking at kind of their considerations as well as their concerns and their constraints. Because a lot of times I think that's the biggest thing, is I don't know other people's constraints. And I know a lot of times when I'm asking for something, I don't know, is this going to be a 2-minute fix or is this going to be like a 2-week fix, especially when it comes to reporting or some of these things. And really getting that input from them can help you really set a lot of these things up and be more successful and be viewed as a team player, and not just like, oh, they just dump a bunch of stuff on us, but they don't ever ask our feedback on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it has been helpful on that. And it's really been, those are all things I think you just kind of learn as you are around an organization a while and kind of figure these things out as you advance in your career. And you're like, oh yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that 5 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Well, thank you. I want to get to a couple more questions here. Just be mindful of your time, because you're going live with the new CRM today. And this one, I thought perhaps, Jason, if you specifically wanted to share with our audience about your involvement with the APRA International Board of Directors, there's a quote that I thought could apply here. And so it's from a late Harvard Business School professor and a disruptive innovation leader, Clayton Christensen. And about 15 years ago, he came out with a book that was based on his last day lecture in the MBA program, called How Will You Measure Your Life? And he passed away, I think, about 5 years ago. But in the book, Professor Christensen said that in sacrificing for something worthwhile, you deeply strengthen your commitment to it. And so I wondered, because I have a list of questions that I on a master file, and as I get guests lined up, I think, well, knowing what I know about this person, maybe this question could apply. So for you, I thought you're on the APRA board. that in itself takes up quite a bit of time. With the CRM, your day job, just personal stuff as well. How have the sacrifices you've had to make to fulfill the APRA International Board responsibilities, whether it's the time, the bandwidth, how has that maybe made you feel that you're fulfilling that responsibility? Does it lead to a deeper commitment? Things like that?
So when I read this too, I really do believe that this statement is true. So serving on the APRA board is a time-consuming endeavor, and there are times where I do have to prioritize some of my volunteer responsibilities. And in doing so, that shifts out some of my professional obligations, which in turn impacts my personal life.
Yes.
So there are times where I end up having to work late to keep up with my workload due to, we'll have meetings or whatever, and then that'll take up some time where I have to do that. And it does sometimes limit my bandwidth and take away my free time. But I think with those obligations, you also gain the benefits, and the deepening and the commitment is there if you see the value gain from that commitment. And so I know from my time on the APRA board, I feel like I've learned so much about the industry and how other organizations run and kind of best practices. And it's really has provided me access to some of the field's best and brightest here on the board and, at PD and all of these things. And those people now really form a cohort of friends and peers that I can reach out with my questions and concerns, or, just to vent about, I'm going through a CRM conversion. So these relationships, and I think the belief that the mission of APRA, that we are helping the fundraisers succeed and making the world a better place, makes up for those sacrifices. And that, for me, is really what has driven that commitment to APRA as a whole, is not only the commitment that I get, but also the benefits that I get back from that. And what I really see that as helping me both personally and professionally, kind of here as a career, and just those relationships that I've built over people over the years. So that's kind of what I think has really driven that deepening commitment for me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, sometimes it can be, I don't know what quite the right term is, maybe pithy, or, it's ethereal, like, we're a community. But when you get in the trenches, like you do on the board, and you're liaising with various committees that they change year to year, and you're meeting more people, and I think that really is true. That's where you do get that deeper sense of, this is what I'm getting out of it, because I'm connecting with people in ways that I wouldn't otherwise, whether that's in person or virtually. So well said. Thank you. And I think it gives, just speaking personally, I think it gives people like myself a sense of, well, because we're not on the board, but we're on other committees. It's like, that seems like a big bite to take. But then when you go a little bit deeper, and then you're talking to you and Lindsay Nadeau and Catherine Flatten, just hearing your own stories of how you manage it and make it work. It's like, okay, like, if other people had that aspiration in the APRA community and time to serve, like, these are good conversations to share and say, look, it is manageable.
It is definitely manageable. I mean, it's a little different. It's definitely a little different than serving on like your local board or whatever. It's going to be more time consuming, but I think the value is there. And I really, if people are interested and they have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on that, and I will help you as much as I can, because I think the value really is there, and you get a lot out of it, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, awesome. Great endorsement. Thank you. Jason, we have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to work in this last question. It's the quote from the actor Eugene Levy. I know his work from the Christopher Guest movies, Waiting for Guffman and A Mighty Wind. I don't know I've heard of the series he's in that draws from this question, Schitt's Creek. I don't know if you ever watched it,
I
but
have. It's
okay.
pretty good. Yep.
But just a few months ago, he was interviewed in the New York Times. Eugene Levy was. And one of the questions he was asked, and he shares in this quote, is he says, what might Eugene have missed out on if he hadn't had his career in the acting profession? And Eugene immediately said, I wouldn't have married my wife. What else would I have missed out on if it hadn't been for this work? And he's got these big, kind of iconic eyebrows, and the interviewer says that the eyebrows raised up. And Eugene finished the answer by saying, I would have missed out on my life. And I thought that was so profound, because I think in American culture, there can still be, and it's different now because of the pandemic and virtual and everything, but I think there is still sort of this sense of, I got to keep my work separate from my personal life and hold fast to those boundaries. Here is where Eugene is saying, because of the work, these significant milestones in my life happened. So my question to you is, what have you seen a direct connection to between your work, being a 3-time alum of Washington State, because of your work, your studies? You mentioned your wife also was in school. Just anything that came to mind, because I thought that was such a profound question and answer from Eugene Levy.
So when I was reading this article, I kind of really pinpointed 3 things that I thought were kind of relevant for me. And the first thing that I thought about was all of the relationships that I've developed during my career that have come directly from this work.
Yeah.
I've had opportunities to develop kind of strong relationships with groups of really fascinating people from kind of not only WSU, but across North America and even the world now through prospect development. We have, an Australian on the board now. So this is really starting to go global.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there are some really exceptional people in our field. I've got to meet great people who I've become friends with, both kind of through my institution, but as well as serving on kind of APRA Northwest and ASP and APRA, and just interacting with people. So I really value those relationships that I would have never had without this career.
Yeah.
The second piece that I have been really grateful for prospect development is this job has provided me a lot of flexibility and just opportunities to do a lot of different things and learn a lot of different skills while working kind of within the same field. Mm-hmm. Many of the items that I currently do on a daily basis, they might involve prospect management or relationship management, doing protocol development, working in data integrity. I deal with personnel management, budgeting, doing project management. So it's really allowed me to do a lot of different things and not really feel stagnant, just kind of stuck doing one thing, because the field really does fuel my intellectual curiosity and it really keeps things fresh. The technology is always gaining so quickly and we have to kind of adapt to that. And I mean, when I first started in the field, I remember when we first got our first kind of rater, and I was like, this is mind blowing. I don't have to go in and look up every assessor site by hand, which was kind of how it was when I first started in the field. And just seeing that from the maturity of the industry, from being kind of very limited prospect research to adding kind of more of the relationship management and then the analytics and all of these things as we continue to grow, it's just been really nice to see. And you can do a lot in this field just kind of being in the advancement services kind of swing of things.
Yeah, definitely.
And then kind of the last thing that I've been super grateful for is this job, as a general rule, provides really good work-life balance. I think myself, like others in our field, can be a little bit type A driven individuals.
Yeah.
But the field has nice work-life balance. I think the vast majority of us work in higher education or healthcare, and it's kind of a pretty nice 8 to 5 kind of structure where even things that are emergencies aren't necessarily emergencies like they were when I was working at 911, and that was a real emergency. So
yes, yeah.
So I've really liked that, and especially post COVID, my entire shop has gone 100% remote.
Oh, okay.
And I have enjoyed this because it has added to my work-life balance, because I get to drop my kids off at school in the morning and I can flex my schedule around a bit more to attend events.
Yeah.
And even prior to being that, my office was about 30 minutes from my house. So it'd be difficult to attend, showing up if they're having their, holiday recital and I want to go to that and it's only 30 minutes. Well, now I can kind of be over to the school and they're within a couple of minutes, come back, flex my time over a little bit. And that to me has been really nice because I get to see my kids' school events and watch them grow up, which I know a lot of people don't have that luxury in their jobs. And that has been really nice for me, which I really appreciated the post-COVID environment.
Oh, definitely. I'm right there with you. Certainly on the relationships, the first one you mentioned, and the third one about just more flexibility in schedules. And I love the fact that I can take my kids to school or see them out the door because they go from high school to elementary school. And yeah, just to be more present in ways that are crucial now, and I think they'll be even more so as the years go on. To have built in that time in the relationship now is so important. So I'm really glad and grateful you mentioned those three, Jason. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that brings us right up to the hour mark, Jason. We chatted for about 15 minutes before we started recording. I just want to thank you for your time today and for the preparation you put into these questions and your responses. It's been really insightful, heartwarming as well. I think it was nice to hear about the importance of relationships, whether that's work or at home. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I really appreciate being invited on.
My pleasure. And for our audience, you will find Jason's interview on my website, peopleinfundraising.com, as well as on LinkedIn and YouTube this fall, 2023. Thank you all for your support. And as always, I'm interested in people proactively raising their hands to be guests. So please follow me on LinkedIn, Tim Wilson, peopleinfundraising.com, or you can reach out to me at peopleinfundraising@gmail.com. And we'll be back next week with another conversation. Thank you.